I'm eager to move to the next topic, which is some of your famous topics or sort of quotes or statements. And you can add more yourself, but let me start with something, and perhaps you can add some other quotes if you can think of it. But I think one quote that you said was, "We will never understand AI if we only focus on AI." Did you come up with that, or did you find it somewhere else? Or?
No, I think I wrote it as a headline at some point, and I've used it in keynote speeches as well.
So what do you mean with that?
What I mean, I think it came on the back of having seen and participating in panels and keynotes where people discuss the details of how a AI model is built to a non-technical audience or any audience who haven't worked with AI, because then it's you can count the seconds until people zone out.
So it's about, you should have a more holistic view of the application of using AI, not just AI itself.
Yeah, I think imagine if you were to explain spreadsheets or Excel by explaining the code. No one would still understand Excel. You have to explain what you can do with it and how it functions in simpler terms. Yeah,
I mean, it's so obvious when you see
it's
it.
It's a good quote.
Yeah.
It's a good quote.
It sounds, first bad, if you only focus on it, but of course, when you hear it explained, it makes so much sense. So, awesome quote. Let's take another one. This is kind of obvious. I'm not sure it's so interesting, but you said something about every technology shift or disruption has two parts, which is the invention or development part and the operational part. Yeah. What do you mean with that?
I mean, it ties back to what we said, something we said at the beginning, that we've seen this before. Yeah. When the internet bubble came around, everyone said, this is just a fluke or a hype. We're not going to have to change. And then everything shifted. No one's going to say today, we don't need to use the internet. And we're the first time in history where the same people in leadership was around back then, but still have the same mentality towards AI. And I think the difference is because tech development always accelerates. It's happening faster and faster.
It's exponential growth.
Yeah. So the first 10 years, internet happened slow, and then it's just happening fast. Uber, Tesla, all these companies just competing and changing the landscape. Yeah. And if this is happening at an exponential pace, when we hit that
inflection point.
Inflection point.
The AI inflection point.
Yeah, where it's widely available. What happens to the market if you still only have a small research lab in the basement and haven't touched your data? Because then you won't have time to act. Yeah.
I think this is something that I try to explain over and over, how we are shifting from one S-curve to another S-curve, from you're on the macro life cycle of the industrial revolution, and now we are shifting to a new macro life cycle of data and AI first. Yeah. And when that sort of takes off, when that sort of when the majority is already on this steep inclination and you have not even started, there's no way of catching up.
No,
there's no way.
And my argument also, because the counter argument is often we don't see any obvious AI use cases. Okay, maybe not right now, but you'll still see value by structuring your data, starting to take data-driven basic analytics decisions. So do it anyway, because the other stuff will come.
I've used exactly this argument to say that there are some no regrets, other way of putting it, activities you can do now. Go for AI, go for operational AI, but also go for the no regrets topics that we know is good for having good AI. And it will help you now, and it will set you up for the future.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Okay, I agree as well, but I think it's fun to play the devil's advocate at some points. And
do it.
And then we have the invention phase, and you also have the operational phase where it actually starts to really make sense and value for a lot of companies. But we also have the effect of the innovator's dilemma in some way, that the company that are the first may not really see the benefit of it, and it can be dangerous to sometimes be the innovator, so to speak. So would that mean, and I'm talking about against myself now in my beliefs, which is really weird for me, but still, Does that mean that companies should not have R&D's development because they shouldn't be caught in the innovator dilemma problem? Or should they wait for other companies to do the innovation and then just tag along? Or what is the best way to really do this?
I think it's both. I think you should identify which opportunities or possibilities are too large to tackle and try to collaborate or learn from others or buy that intellectual property or tech from others. And then identify, okay, which can be our competitive advantages or what data should we hold on to? Yeah. Currently, I think it's an either or situation where people, they don't want to share anything, even though they don't know what, or they don't want to learn from anyone else because they don't know how to work with it.
I mean, well said. I think, the mix is the best. And even though there is an innovator dilemma, it's not always the case. And very often if you find that, really core thing and really become the leading innovator, that can be a hugely valuable position to be in. Right? So you need to always innovate. But I think it's so important to just, keep track of what others are doing as well and catch on with that.
Yeah.
If you do both, the mix, as you say, trying to keep up with what the others are doing and then not you just skip over the innovation part because you recognize they did something good. At the same time, also innovating to actually find those parts, you should be home safe or you should be in good position, right?
But here, I look at this from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
I think both of your arguments are, this idea is valid. But when my understanding for data and AI, and I like to talk about data and AI ready. This is a journey. So for me, it's a journey. The way I experience it, both Vattenfall and now Scania, it's like, oh my God, you don't know anything until you have started and learned by doing is the key story. So for me, it's not about I'm doing cutting edge innovation or not. It's about, you know what, you don't have a clue what this is all about until you dip your feet and then stay, And when I say that, I'm actually more on the operational side than the cutting edge side. So it's a little bit like, let's get some really good BI self-service going, of very stupid stuff for automating a process. Because when you start we need to optimize or automate as key metrics, and you start pursuing that, you actually learn about this is a new operating model, this is a new organizational construct, this is a new technology stack, and it's a new set of dealing and treating data. And there is no way in hell, it has nothing to do with innovation. It's a hard slug. And this is this sort of, and in order to accelerate even, and to my opinion, that's data and AI ready. It's not so glamorous. Some of it is maybe glamorous, but I'm doing it. You gotta do it to learn it, to understand it. Yeah. That's my angle on this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I agree. And I mean, the optimal scenario would be that you have cutting edge R&D here and some stuff that's super easy but affects how you run your organization. So you can integrate that here. Yeah. But if you have to prioritize, I would probably argue towards the low-hanging fruit that affects how you run your company, because then you can expand into the other. It's harder to go the other way around.
Yeah, and it's the whole idea. Can an enterprise disrupt himself?
Yeah.
Are you able to? And what we have had the strategy both in Vattenfall and now in Scania has been also, okay, how can we have use cases that impacts people's understanding for data, literally build data literacy. So sometimes it's not fancy at all, but it actually gets you understanding what is data and why is this data like this. I just simply, this old boring giving transparency to data has nothing to do with AI, but it's actually part of the journey that we kind of need to treat our data in a different way. So I don't know. I mean, innovation, I think, is also important. But what I like with innovation, the way Peltorin and you always talk about it, is like you don't overhype it to something else. Like be concrete on a very concrete problem. Get the camera, fix the lawnmowers. Do something super concrete. Is that fancy? I don't know. It's super fancy from AI point of view, but as a concrete problem, it's very clear. Yeah. So what is innovation that is fantastic to me for a normal company?
I think it's another topic also that you touch into that perhaps we should take at some point, which is, how research in AI is being done today, especially in academia, versus how research in industry, which actually is in AI bigger than in academia, I would argue. But I think it's a different topic. So perhaps later we can move into that.
Which topic are we on now? We're circling now.
Okay, so we spoke
you
about...
see what happened, right?
We are still on Kye's famous quotes.
Yes. So we just spoke about, innovation versus operation and the two phases and how we need both, I guess, is a summary of it, right? Yeah. And I think one of the favorite quotes of all, really, that you made, that at least my favorite, is how ethical is it not to use AI?
Yes, I know.
Yes.
Right? And can you just, elaborate a bit more, what do you mean with that?
Well, it came from, I think it was probably 2 years ago now, when every politician in the world started talking, and probably business leaders started talking about, we need to use AI ethically, which to many of us, we just heard, okay, you don't understand AI at all. So if you discuss ethics, you don't have to act. It was like a snuttefilt, a comforter to not act, because then you could just stop and discuss ethics for a while. But the question that was never asked was, what can we use AI for? Like,
what's the opportunity cost of not using
what's the opportunity cost? And going back to the risk assessment of healthcare, okay, if that's deemed as a high risk area, healthcare, and we don't use AI, people are dying. Is that ethical?
Yeah. So I guess in some case you can compare the two scenarios and say, here's a country that's used AI a lot in healthcare, here's one does not. And you can see when they started to use AI, they had reduction in deaths or in improvement in life expectancies or whatnot, right?
Yes, and even here in Sweden, we have regions who've come very far with applying AI broadly in Region Halland, who've seen great health benefits and saved a lot of resources already.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important. But also one more thing there. We're currently in the process of setting up an AI ethical committee, as a national one. And we've done a lot of interviews with experts and still a little bit uncertain if there is any purely AI ethical use case that doesn't fall into normal ethical
topics. So you mean normal ethical rules
and regulations? Yeah, it's just on a bigger scale or a different timeline.
I find that very interesting. So because we need to have an AI strategy, we need to have a data strategy. Well, we have business strategy, and then we have AI implications of that strategy. Isn't ethics the same?
Yes.
What is AI ethics compared to data ethics or digital ethics or IT ethics?
I think it's a data problem in terms that it adds more honesty. Yeah. You have to be truthful about, we've been discriminating up until now.
Because we take the classical cases.
Listen to what he said. I think this is more profound than you think.
Because currently when we do a credit check, when you apply for a loan, it's okay to discriminate because it's people. Once we start doing it with AI,
it's not okay.
It's not okay anymore. Yeah. And then we have to be honest about it.
But how good is that? That really puts a light on what the real problem is. I mean, like, you can flip the whole conversation. Back to your quote. How ethical is it to not use AI?
Yeah, exactly. With AI, we could probably start to mitigate the problem, hopefully.
But it's also, there is an unfair or different comparison if you take machines versus human. And, I guess, self-driving cars is the easiest one to just think of in your head. And, let's say a car kills another person and it's a human driving or it's a machine driving. And then the question is, what is the requirement on a human and what is the requirements on a machine to be able to allow it on the street? And we allow people that should never sit in front of a steering wheel to be on the street today, even if they're drunk or they're tired or they don't even know the street signs or whatnot. But for a machine to drive on the street, we put super high requirements. I think it's okay. They should be like 10 times more, stricter requirements on a machine. But I think people need to recognize that.
And have that discussion as well. I mean, we've seen those differences when we discussed with our acquaintances from other countries where they have a more collective thinking, that they don't have the same philosophical problem, because it's more natural to think that the collective good is prioritized over the individual good. But here in Sweden, we have very high value of our individual priorities. So it's a big problem for us.
Interesting. Which countries are a little bit different here, you would say?
I would say China.
China, yeah.
Which has its pros and cons.
Yeah.
I'm eager to jump into the China discussion.
And then we always, back to ethics, and we had Louise Kallenberg here.
Yeah.
And she has her background even as a priest. So ethics is very closely connected to values and culture. So what is ethics in one country and what is ethical?
Exactly. And
Is it cultural or
I think it's important that we spend time on challenging, or at least discussing the given truths that we all just accept. I mean, everyone who's read Sapiens know that most of the things that we accept as given truths, democracy, human rights, are still constructs by us humans.
Yes.
Are those the best things for humanity in the long run? I mean, you could argue that democracy and climate change are two things that don't really work well together, since we've still, I don't know which climate conference we're on right now.
So we need climate dictatorship for the good.
I wouldn't say that. Don't use that as a quote, unless it's a T-shirt.
Okay, but
Climate dictatorship for better, for good. Yeah. I don't know.
what about AI dictatorship? Okay, but let's at least one more question about ethical, because you can speak forever about this. But okay, let's say that we want to now have a medical AI system. Let's go back to self-driving cars. I think why not? Okay, now we want to build in the best type of ethics we can think of in the car. And there are a number of ways to do that. Of course, we can have rule-based system manually programmed by humans, or we can have a more data-driven approach where you simply learn, hopefully not by killing millions of people and then learning, but hopefully a bit quicker. Do you have any thoughts? Should we have humans writing rules to define what is ethical or not, or can it be a purely data-driven approach to learn what is ethical or not?
I don't think, if we have access to all the data, I don't think we can combine data and the way we perceive democracy as today, because then we will prioritize more people who contribute more to society over people who do less, because then it'll be a purely economic system, right?
But that could be applied both for humanly coded rules as well as data-driven.
Yes, definitely.
I certainly don't have the answer for that.
No, I don't know.
It's
a too complicated question. I mean, we've seen it recently in the pandemic, where we, I think, for the first time prioritized short-term elderly prioritization over long-term children prioritization.
Exactly.
But is it because we bring the word ethics into this? Because if you ask Elon Musk, and you can watch the video when he's talking, when the car is driving from Los Angeles to San Francisco, he's basically saying, you know what, don't even try to program this. This is data of billions of data. And we are now, and he's going quite into detail of, how they have learned what is the lane, what is the drivable lane, is a core metric, right? Where does the car fit?
Still,
and for me, this is data driven to the max.
But what you also said, though, which is obvious, is, the one core rule for Teslas is never crash. And that is a hard-coded rule.
Now,
at least one.
It's like the robotics laws almost. For
Asimov's laws,
Asimov's laws.
No, I agree with that. Obviously, data-driven for autonomy, but if a situation occurs where there's an adult and a child, and it has to be a prioritization.
A dog
so, but if you have enough data points...
True. But the problem is you don't want to collect like 1 million data points about killing 2 million dogs and 1 million people.
No, but then we end up with some sort of combination.
Yeah.
We end up with some sort of combination.
Yeah, I think so.
Perhaps. Yeah. As long as you don't speak about hybrid AI, because then I get annoyed. But okay.
This is a new term.
Let's not go there. Okay, cool. Okay, so that was,
Hybrid AI.
I didn't.
He
want to
opened
go
up
there.
Pandora's box. Hybrid AI. What the hell is that?
I don't know what is that,
PowerPoint
but it's
keynote?
good.
No, okay. I don't. It's just as you shouldn't talk about suicide. You shouldn't speak about how to make nuclear weapons, and you shouldn't speak about how to build bombs. Neither should you speak about hybrid AI.
Okay,
so let's close it with that.
So we'll leave it that as a cliffhanger, and everybody can Google it.
Okay. I think we can close. I had one point, potentially, but if you have some other quotes that you'd like to bring up that I may have missed, I was thinking about something that we have been speaking about a bit, and I know you have been speaking about a number of times, which is digitization versus digitalization. But it's, I think we mentioned it so many times already, so perhaps it's not super interesting.
I mean, I don't use any of those terms that much, but I know that they're both used, and sometimes people use them wrongly. I know the one basically means just shifting whatever you do physically
lift and shift,
to the digital world, and the other one means change for the digital world or according to the digital world.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I have another topic that I'd like to talk about because I actually spoke about that yesterday quite a lot. Actually, it's actually an AI Sweden thing, the NLP webinar thing.
Yeah.
But the use case library, and this is something that comes from the AI agenda work. We have this big 1 year plus work trying to basically come up with a set of rules or some guidance for Swedish politicians in how to simply use AI in the best way. And one of the ideas of the crystallized 23 action points is to build up a use case factory. And it's similar to AI Sweden's data factory. It's exactly where the term came from. That is not sufficient perhaps to simply have a data factory, but actually have some kind of use case factory to make people learn, how to use it. And you have worked a lot with this. So you built up a use case library as well.
So what is it?
Well, basically, the idea came around 2.5 years from discussions with you and others that people don't understand AI unless we show them what AI can do. So we need a lot of examples in one place. So you as a business owner, CEO, or a politician or a citizen can go in and say, okay, I'm in work in forestry. What can it do for me? And understand it in super simple terms. And once you've read a few cases, then you start
seeing the patterns.
Yeah, then you see the patterns and start to build that.
Great idea.
And we started building it last year together with also Reactor, and I think currently Poltarian is working on materializing it, and we're trying to collaborate on creating this. And I think we have 140 different use cases. And a key important factor is also to package them with simple language, so we don't fall in the trap of using tech.
I still think you should be allowed to use tech though, but
so come.
It could be an expand.